Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Kim Brown in Baltimore. The third and final presidential debate was held Wednesday night in Las Vegas, and it was glaring in what was omitted from the designated topics. Again, no mention of climate change, criminal justice reform, or racism. But before we delve into the debate, we have to hear what GOP nominee Donald Trump said on Thursday.
I would like to promise and pledge to all of my voters and supporters and to all of the people of the United States that I will totally accept the results of this great and historic presidential election if I win.
And this is basically an extension of what Trump has been saying recently, that the election will be rigged in favor of Democrat Hillary Clinton, and he may not be likely to concede defeat should he lose. And joining us to discuss this and some of the constitutional and Supreme Court issues raised at Wednesday night's debate is Kamau Franklin. Kamau is an attorney who has also organized around issues such as youth development, police misconduct, and creating sustainable urban communities. Thank you so much for joining us, Kamau.
Thank you for having me.
All right, well, let's start with what Trump just said just now. That was recorded Thursday, earlier today. It's a doubling down of what he said at the debate as well, basically saying that he's going to take a wait-and-see approach about whether or not he would concede defeat if he loses on November the 8th. But people who are defending Donald Trump in these comments are citing the 2000 election and the subsequent court case of Bush v. Gore. So, Kamau, can you explain to us how these scenarios are different?
Well, they're completely different. You have a major presidential candidate, a nominee of a major party, saying before the election is even held that he won't respect the results, that he expects the system to be rigged, and that whatever the outcome is, unless he wins, he won't accept it. So I think in the terms of U.S. democracy, what there is of democracy here, that's a major upheaval within the two system. It's something that I think the elites in particular, both economic elites and political elites, are going to be truly concerned with. In Bush v. Gore, what we had was post the voting discrepancies in a particular state of Florida, and those discrepancies led to court cases and potential recounting, which the Supreme Court came in and decided upon who would be president based on their own majority opinion of their ideological backing of swing. So you had a conservative court, in other words, that came and decided for the conservative and decided to stop the vote. Again, an interruption of democracy, but one in which was accepted by the opposing candidate after it was said and done. Here you don't have that. Here you have a candidate basically trying to do all he can to stir his supporters to not accept the outcome of an election. Again, it's something I think that makes political elites and economic elites really nervous about this election.
And speaking of the Supreme Court, the issue of gun control and the Second Amendment also came up at the debate.
Because I support the Second Amendment doesn't mean that I want people who shouldn't have guns to be able to threaten you, kill you or members of your family. And so when I think about what we need to do, we have 33,000 people a year who die from guns. I think we need comprehensive background checks, need to close the online loophole, close the gun show loophole. There's other matters that I think are sensible, that are the kind of reforms that would make a difference, that are not in any way conflicting with the Second Amendment. You mentioned the Heller decision, and what I was saying that you referenced, Chris, was that I disagreed with the way the court applied the Second Amendment in that case, because what the District of Columbia was trying to do was to protect toddlers from guns. And so they wanted people with guns to safely store them. And the court didn't accept that reasonable regulation, but they've accepted many others. So I see no conflict between saving people's lives and defending the Second Amendment.
Let me bring Mr.
Before we go any further, in Chicago, which has the toughest gun laws in the United States, probably you could say by far, they have more gun violence than any other city. So we have the toughest laws, and you have tremendous gun violence. I am a very strong supporter of the Second Amendment, and I don't know if Hillary was saying it in a sarcastic manner, but I'm very proud to have the endorsement of the NRA, and it's the earliest endorsement they've ever given to anybody who ran for president. So I'm very honored by all of that. We are going to appoint justices. This is the best way to help the Second Amendment. We are going to appoint justices that will feel very strongly about the Second Amendment, that will not do damage to the Second Amendment.
Donald Trump wants to help the Second Amendment, and the case that they are referencing is the 2008 Supreme Court case of the District of Columbia, versus Heller, in which that was a 5-4 decision. It was upholding an individual's rights to possess firearms. And Mrs. Clinton says that this decision did upset her. And she mentioned toddlers having access to guns. Was this the crux of that case? And is the right to bear arms in danger of being weakened by a liberal court?
I don't think it's in danger of being weakened. I think that, again, I think these are ideological matters that the court system itself has moved so far to the right that coming out against the Second Amendment in any way, even sensible ways, that suggests that there should be zones in which gun protection levels are heightened as opposed to maybe some other places, that stuff is considered to be off the table at this particular stage in American democracy. I think the movement for the Second Amendment and through the NRA has pushed the establishment so far that no gun rule, no matter how small it is, actually is enough to withstand a case by the right wing or the NRA in terms of gun protection, in terms of like no protection against people carrying guns. So I think what Hillary Clinton was speaking of could have been a small victory for people and families who are concerned about gun violence, particularly gun violence around schools, guns that are kept in homes with children. So again, some small regulations, but I think we are living at a time where there's such a sort of fanatical view around some folks making sure that they can keep their right to guns because in their belief system, they are preparing for a revolution against other folks who are taking over their country, that political common sense in this way has gone out the window.
So there's an issue of common sense, absolutely. But let's talk about what Donald Trump, the point that he raised about certain places like the District of Columbia, like Chicago, that have extremely stringent gun laws, but it doesn't seem to stem gun violence. Would additional laws or controls on guns be enough to curb the hundreds of millions of existing guns that are already out there now?
It's not if other places are not adhering to some of the same protections. Because as folks may know, most people get their guns not in the city or state that they live in, but they come mainly from southern states or other states that have very loose regulations. And so transporting guns, a very small item, is easily done. So it's not necessarily would cut down tremendously on it. But again, you may want to have some rules and regulations that you think make sense that may deter some things from happening. These are obviously larger issues than just about whether or not guns are entering our communities. These are about whether or not these communities have enough resources to sort of have pushed towards a new way in which people settling issues through gun violence becomes something that folks are no longer interested in doing, to be honest. So if we don't worry or think about the economic circumstances, think about the social circumstances, think about the racial circumstances at play, just advocating for gun control or gun rights alone is not an answer. I think that sometimes has taken the place for serious work that has to be done in our communities to make change. But I think this sort of discussion has become a way to take away from that and just build in something simple that people can have a left or right opinion on. So I don't think at the end of the day it's the crux of how we're going to solve the issues of killing in our community. We're going to solve some of those issues when people have jobs and have safe space and have lives that they care about more in these communities.
So the candidates were also at completely opposing viewpoints regarding abortion and a woman's right to choose, and the issue of Roe v. Wade did come up at the debate.
Do you want the court, including the justices that you will name, to overturn Roe v. Wade, which includes includes, in fact states, a woman's right to abortion.
Well, if that would happen, because I am pro-life and I will be appointing pro-life judges, I would think that that will go back to the individual states.
But I'm asking you specifically, would you
If they overturned it, it'll go back to the states.
But what I'm asking you, sir, is do you want to see the court overturn? You just said you want to see the court protect the Second Amendment. Do you want to see the court overturn Roe v. Wade?
Well, if we put another 2 or perhaps 3 justices on, that's really what's going to be, will happen. And that'll happen automatically, in my opinion, because I am putting pro-life justices on the court. I will say this, it will go back to the states, and the states will then make a determination.
I will defend Planned Parenthood. I will defend Roe v. Wade, and I will defend women's rights to make their own health care decisions.
Secretary,
and we have come too far to have that turn back now. And indeed, he said women should be punished, that there should be some form of punishment for women who obtain abortions. And I could just not be more opposed to that kind of thinking.
Hillary Clinton making her position pretty clear right there, but Donald Trump seems to be slightly misinformed about how the Supreme Court system works. He said that once he appoints conservative justices to the court under a Trump administration, that Roe v. Wade would be overturned automatically. I don't think that's how it works.
Well, no, I mean, what the Supreme Court would do would, if it was more conservative than it is now with other conservative justices on the bench, it would decide to take a case from the state courts, from other federal courts, maybe, or appeal courts, I should say, that would, that they could decide that actually could overturn Roe v. Wade. I think this is actually one of the real differences between these candidates that's not strictly around hype. That Donald Trump has, again, veered towards deciding or making decisions that abortion rights as something that's nationally protected, something that's constitutionally protected, is something that should be overturned. And that would then, if depending on what the decision is, if it either bans abortion outright or if it says these are non-constitutional matters and for each individual states to decide, could be a system in which one state has abortion rights, another state doesn't. It sounds, however, that if we went ahead and these conservative justices were picked, that abortion would actually be banned in the United States on some level. So it's, usually amongst these mainstream candidates, I see little differences in terms of what their actual policies are. They usually have a neoliberal view, whether or not they are Democrats or Republicans. But I think this kind of stand actually is something that's particularly scary to women about who gets to control their bodies and what will happen if more conservative justices are appointed to the Supreme Court.
But when he says that he believes that these rights will be overturned automatically, I mean, the process of bringing a case before the Supreme Court, not to mention actually trying to confirm 2 or 3 justices, I mean, we're talking years here. This is not something that would happen automatically or overnight.
No, he's correct. I mean, you're correct. It wouldn't happen automatically all over or overnight. However, remember there is one Supreme Court Justice, Scalia's position that's unfilled, that if Donald Trump were to get elected, he would immediately appoint someone very conservative, which would give them another conservative edge on the court. And that one pick alone potentially could do more damage or further damage to the rights of women when it comes to abortion. So I think even in that way, this is not something that is that far off in terms of a concern. It's something that could happen within a matter of a year or so, depending on the case that the Supreme Court decided to take in order to address the issue.
So also talk about how Senator John McCain recently made the comment that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that should Hillary Clinton be elected, that he would not confirm a Clinton nominee or appointment to the Supreme Court. Now, his office tried to soften this statement a little bit and tried to walk it back, but it seemed to set a pretty defiant tone about the Senate, particularly the conservatives in the Senate, the Republicans in the Senate, about their attitude towards allowing Democrats to make appointments to this court. How dangerous of a sentiment or a statement is that of John McCain?
It's very dangerous. We're entering unprecedented times again within the United States with the left-right divide. you have conservatives who are saying, including obviously Donald Trump, who is a controversial figure on the right, but nonetheless still who has some backing, and conservatives in Congress, in the Senate in particular, who are saying that no matter who gets elected, right, that they won't go forth with their constitutional duty, which is to have a process in which they review the credentials of the Supreme Court nominee, and then if that person is deemed to be appropriate, has the right credentials, then they're supposed to take a vote. But they've now entered the stage of deciding whether or not they will allow anyone to fill that slot. And again, I think for people who are interested, when I say political elites and economic elites, these are dangerous times when not only your standard bearer for the Republican Party is someone who's outside of the ordinary, with extraordinarily conservative and outright crazy views on some things, is your standard bearer. And when you have these two parties which are fighting over policies, and one party in particular which is representing a working class white backlash of folks who are feeling they're losing control of their country, you're living in some unprecedented times that I don't know what the outcome would be, whether or not a Hillary Clinton wins or a Donald Trump wins. I think we're headed to some really hard and potentially dangerous times.
And it must be noted or reminded to our audience that President Obama nominated Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court 1 month after Antonin Scalia passed away. And that was in March of 2016. And Merrick Garland has yet to even have a confirmation hearing, let alone moving along to be confirmed as an appointee of the Supreme Court. So it seems a little striking that the Supreme Court's business and daily activity, their raison d'etre, the reason to be, could be compromised here based on politics.
Yeah, I mean, and again, having Supreme Court picks who openly are picked for political reasons. I mean, it's something I think that has always happened, but the cover was that we're picking people with credentials, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think that is even, people are not even speaking that way anymore. There's litmus tests that are being set up, and if you don't reach the test that they want you to, then you won't be able to, you will not be able to go forth with that nominee. So I think, again, these things are really dangerous in terms of how people are treating the Supreme Court as a politicized entity, and it means that the court won't necessarily be able to have its judgments looked upon as something that's the law of the land for everyone. People will see it either as a tool of the Democrats or a tool of the Republicans, which delegitimizes what the Supreme Court supposedly is about.
That's Kamau K. Franklin. Kamau is an attorney who has also organized around issues such as youth development, police misconduct, and creating sustainable urban communities. He's been speaking to us today from Atlanta. Kamau, we certainly appreciate your time today. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching the Real News Network.